Nice looking fella here. Okay, so he is the one that was responsible for finding neutrons. And we're going to learn in the next few days about the how we calculate and determine if we have something called an isotope. But just realize that with isotopes, you end up having the same number of protons, but your neutrons vary. So his discovery, when he was able to explain these isotopes, his discovery of the neutron was critical to that. So at this point, we have been able to identify all three types of subatomic particles: the proton, the electron, and now finally the neutron. Okay. The Bohr model is one of the models that we work with in here. It's not exactly what's the accepted model, but it's kind of the more simplistic one. Okay. So the neutron is here. It's electrically neutral. Essentially what a neutron is a proton and an electron that are together. Okay. They're attracted to one another because of opposite charges. Okay. And they're neutral because you've got a positive and a negative coming together to make neutral. Okay. Now, is it exactly the same thing as a proton and electron together? No, but it's just a good way to get you to kind of think about that. Tony, earbud. Electrons then are found out in this outer cloud, and Bohr said that we had these different levels here. We're going to learn about these levels and kind of the shapes of them when we get into chapter 5. One of the things that he saw was that when an atom is energized, those electrons are going to release energy in the form of light. We can use a prism to separate those, and that's actually what we're doing. We're working with these spectroscopes today. We're working with these in honors. So when we get into chapter 5, you'll have an opportunity to work with one of these to look at those different energy signatures. Each element then has a different energy signature coming off of it, and that's how they're able to determine different elements, like on the sun. For example, nobody's actually been to the sun and taken a sample of the atoms that are there, but they know that it's mostly hydrogen and helium. How do they do that? Well, they look at the light coming off and look at these different lines that are created based on that, the kind of energy signature that is known for that particular element. All right. So I think he's one of our last guys that we're going to talk about. So this is Heisenberg. Okay. And Heisenberg, most of these guys were actually awarded Nobel Prizes. His was in physics, and he was the one that created this concept of quantum mechanics, which gets kind of crazy and weird and warped. And if you really get into nerding out, this is something that you want to read up on. Otherwise, that's getting too far into the physics pond, and I don't like the water. So he said that electrons are going to behave like waves, and that we can't know exactly the location of an electron. We can't figure that out, but we can calculate regions where there's a high probability that an electron would be found. Okay, so just as a timeline kind of going through this, we had Democritus. We had Dalton that came along about, 2,000 years later. Then we had Thomson. He's the one that came up this plum pudding model. He came up with the idea of these protons. We had Rutherford. Rutherford came up with the idea of the electrons. We had Bohr, which came up with this idea of the planetary model. And then finally Heisenberg. Now notice when Heisenberg died. He died in 1976. Most of your parents were probably born before this guy died, or very shortly after. Okay, so I was actually walking on the earth when this guy still was alive. I mean, that's kind of crazy to think, that this has really not been that long ago that this guy came up with these ideas. He died when he was 75. That's not a tremendously old age to be when you pass away. So, I mean, that's really kind of incredible that we've come this far in just this short a time. All right. So that's it for the timeline. Okay. So then I want to talk to you about your assignment and give you some time to work on that.